and welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast mid-season review. That's right, Arsenal Women have come to more or less the halfway point of the season. They're on their Christmas break now and players going back to see their families and everything like that. And actually, I think that's actually a really nice feature of the women's season, the fact that the players get to do that they have their kind of little Christmas break in the middle. So Arsenal kind of going pretty well at the moment, coming in on the back of 11 games unbeaten after a pretty inauspicious start to the season, and the resignation of Jonas Eidebau and everything around that. It really feels like it's been about 3 seasons in one so far. So we'll go back over that. And sorry, I should introduce presently our co-host Jamie Spanger. Jamie, how are you doing?
Tim, very good. Feeling the Christmas spirit. It's been a good week to be an Arsenal fan. Finally, the men's team and the women's team are on the same page this weekend. So, yeah, going into Christmas happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And full disclosure, we're recording this about half an hour later because I was out after the men's game last night. I went to watch the boxing and I was awake but not awake for a 9 a.m. record. So we've gone for a 9:30. Little bit of a health warning for you because we're recording on a Sunday. My daughter's kicking about and therefore, you might get some domestic texture. But that's okay. We're fans of that on the Arsecast, both the men's and the women's show. We're child friendly, dog friendly, all of that. We tend to leave all of that stuff in because that's just life. But we're going to go back over the season as it's been so far. And in the first half, we're just going to kind of do almost like awards, really, player of the season as a bit of a lever to talk about some things. And then in the second half, we put a call out for questions on Blue Sky. And just a reminder, we don't use Twitter anymore for calls for questions on the podcast. We only really use Blue Sky and sometimes the Arseblog Discord as well. So we'll address your questions in the second half, and there'll be some things that maybe we'll leave to the second half because we know they're coming up in the questions. Obviously, January transfer window and things like that. But Jamie, first of all, and I think what's kind of going to be interesting about doing this type of show is that there really is a kind of before Renee and after Renee vibe to the half season so far. But let's go with, who is your player of the season so far?
I had a couple on this list, but Tim, I think I'm going to go with Frida Mornham. I think she started the season, like you say, the before Renee, the after Renee. I think she's maintained it, and she's probably one of the only players that has maintained it throughout, week 1 to Christmas time now. So, look, I think last season for Frida Mornham, obviously when Victoria Pelova is in such firing form as she was and playing really consistently, it was hard for Frida to get in. I think she didn't actually have 2 back-to-back WSL starts last season, and now she started 9 out of 10 games. So, Look, I think she's back. She's back firing on all cylinders. She's just playing with a lot of confidence. I think she's probably the best player in that 10 attacking midfield kind of role in maybe the league when you really think about it. I think she's been really consistent and obviously made some good Champions League moments as well. But yeah, I'm going to say Frida. It's pleasing to see as well, isn't it, Tim? Because I think, last season we were kind of hoping for more after what we saw in the 2022-23 season. So yeah, Frida, you get my award, mate.
Yeah, she would definitely be on my list. I think you're right. I think she's probably benefited from, Pelova being injured, and the fact that Rosa Kafaji is obviously undergoing some kind of adaptation process, and it's kind of really made the role hers. But I think she's just worked on a real few key elements of her game, particularly her finishing. There's a lot more variety in her finishing, and I don't think she's kind of just standing there waiting for a shot anymore. My player of the season so far, Frida would very much be on my list. I think Caitlin, quite similar in the respect of someone who even before the managerial change was I think playing really well, and has, she's someone who we probably thought she'd lose her place when Mariona came in, and she hasn't done. But my player of the season so far, I'm not going to complicate this, it's Emily Fox. To do what she's done, particularly off the back of a really exhausting summer, and she's flying to the US and playing every game for the US as well, and there just doesn't seem to be anything that ruffles this woman in any way, shape or form. She's just I've rarely seen a player for whom stress just doesn't seem to exist. She just does everything in such a matter-of-fact way, both on the pitch and I think off the pitch. That's the vibe I get from her as well. And she's been, when I say she's been unfortunate, the injury to Laura Wienreuter has meant that we just haven't been able to rotate in that position at all, which was certainly in the plan in pre-season because of the summer she had. And she just doesn't seem flummoxed by any of it at all. And I think she's the best right back in the league. I maybe by a distance. Lucy Bronze has done reasonably well at Chelsea, but I think she's in a different part of her career now. But for me, Emily Fox is just that kind of player that I just feel like she's like, usually good right backs are like, good 7 out of 10 every game. Whereas I feel like with Emily Fox, you get like an 8 or a 9 out of 10 every game. So she's definitely my player of the season so far. And she had started every game up until Vålerenga away. Let's shift gears a little bit then, Jamie, and let's go for like most improved player or surprise player. And effectively, this is just a device to talk about any other player that you think has done quite well, whether it's because they've improved or they've been a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I'll fly the Australian flag here. I'm going to go with Steph Catley for sure.
I knew you would.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to be predictable sometimes, not shocking anyone. Last season, I think she copped a lot of flack, and rightfully so. She was caught out on against a lot of opponents. I think when you're playing behind someone like Katie McCabe, it's hard because we know the form that Katie's been in over the last couple of years. So look, she wasn't really breaking into the starting 11, and I think she had some moments that were quite forgettable, like Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Like, I guess that was a forgettable night for everyone, but yeah, I think a lot of fans were maybe calling for, is it coming to the end of like Steph Catley's dynamic left back era? And then, this Renee Slegers interim head coach, announcement happened, and then in comes Steph Catley and Renee. Something we spoke about in preseason, Tim, was maybe giving her a go at left centre back, because we saw what she did against Leicester City in the back end of last season. And look, I think she's been absolutely superb. I think she's been superb week in and week out. I don't think she's faltered. I think that she's bringing something to, not only her individual performances are improving, but she's bringing so much to the Arsenal team. We've spoken about, her left foot in the back four and how helpful that is for unlocking wide players, unlocking the midfield. I think she's genuinely just been rock solid. So look, her and Leah Williamson are striking up a real partnership, and I think there's a lot to say about, when Lotte Wubben-Moy was the player of the season last season, and albeit she's had some injuries and she's struggled with concussion and getting back into the squad, but when she's struggling to get into the starting 11 because Steph Catley is playing so well, then I will talk about her for hours if I could. But yeah, no, Steph Catley is definitely my surprise, most improved, but I think she was on my list as player of the season as well.
Yeah, I think it's clear that Renee's unlocked something there by moving her to centre half. My actual answer to this is Daphne van Domselaar, but we have questions in the second half about the goalkeeper situation, so I'll leave that there. And I'll say, like, most improved player, and again, this is probably the player who's had the biggest, like, before Renee, after Renee remontada is Alessia Russo. And I wouldn't say it's a surprise player because I was tipping her for the Golden Boot based on how she finished last season. She finished last season so strongly, came into the summer strongly, was playing well for England, played well in pre-season in Washington, and I was thinking, okay, we've unlocked, like, Alessia the footballer has always been elite, but I felt like we were waiting to unlock Alessia, the goal scorer, and I felt like that work was well on its way. And then this season starts, and clearly very, very low on confidence. I know I keep mentioning it, but there's in the Chelsea game, the final of Jonas's games in charge, there's a point where Mariona passes to her in the box, and she just cannot get rid of the ball and get out of the way quickly enough. And now, if you put Leslie in that situation now, I guarantee you she turns and shoots. Just absolute night and day in terms of confidence. And she's really looking like, that really reliable goal scorer now, which I think we've been waiting for. And I think, she's got that mix now of knowing when to drop and hold the ball up and then when to get back in the box. And yeah, so I won't say I'm massively surprised because I did kind of think that this was going to happen, but I didn't see the dip at the beginning of the season. That's what I didn't see coming. And I think maybe the question Leslie has to answer long term is, can she not be a confidence player? can she just be the player that just always does it, that just always produces, and doesn't have these kind of purple patches in one direction and the other? Can she get that goal when she's not playing well or the team's not playing well? And I'm kind of fascinated to see that, because I think it's in there. I think it's in this player. I really, really do, and it's been great to see it. But what about then, Jamie, player who, trying to think of a polite way to phrase this, really, but player who probably hasn't had a great half season so far, and someone who'll really be looking to pick it up for the second half of the season for you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Beth Mead. I think, look, I do see a lot of discourse online about Beth Mead, and I think Arsenal fans maybe forget how good she has been and how good she has been just not long ago, just before her ACL, and how dynamic she was. We've spoken about it. I think I spoke about it even last week. I said, like, Beth Mead was a machine. She used to be an absolute machine, and she'd fire on all cylinders. And I think we haven't seen that at all this season. She definitely seems like a player that, really thrived on the Yona side of our system. And I don't think she's maybe doing as well under the Renee Slegers system. Although it's not as different, I don't think she's benefiting from it. Look, I think Beth Mead, she's had her moments, and it's not like she's not had her glimpses, but she does need to do a little bit more. I think when Mariona is playing in that central role, it opens up, some opportunity for Mead in the width, and she hasn't really taken that by the horns yet, and I'd really like to see her do that. Thought she was actually quite positive when she came on against Bayern Munich, so I'm hoping that really flows on. But yeah, for me, I think Mead's probably the only one that I'm saying maybe needs a bit of a drastic pickup as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that, and we've got a couple of questions on it in the second half as well. So I'll kind of address that there maybe. But I think clearly as well, one of the players who'll be targeting an improved or a better second half of the season would be Rosa Kafaji, who we haven't seen that much of yet. And asked Renee about this a couple of times, and she said it takes. Some players, it just takes them time to adapt, and that seems to be what's happening with Rosa. Obviously, she started her season quite early as well because she was playing in Sweden, and I'm not really worried long term because I think you can see there's a player there. But I was kind of always told when we signed her that the first half of the season was probably going to be like this, that they felt that there was some development, and I think what it kind of exposes isn't the right word, but I think what it illustrates sometimes about the transfer market is sometimes teams kind of have to go for these players maybe a bit too early. I think maybe that happened with Kyra as well, because the competition for them becomes so stiff that it's like, if we don't buy her now, we might not get her. Type thing. I think that probably happened with Kyra. She was coming to the end of her contract at Hammarby, and Chelsea were interested, United were interested, and Arsenal probably didn't need her at that point, but probably thought, well, I think they thought, if we don't get her now, she'll be gone. She won't be available to us. I suspect that's what's happened with Rosa Kapaji as well. That ideally, Arsenal probably would have liked to have made this signing after the Euros, but they needed a player, a younger attacking player, and I think they realised that if they didn't jump this summer, the player would probably be gone to them, because she'd go to like Chelsea or Lyon or someone else. So I do think this is happening quite a bit at elite level women's football. Same with Gio. That was a transfer that probably happened a summer too early. Catherine Cool as well. That's probably a transfer that happened 18 months too early, and we can see what's happened there as well. So I do think this happens, and I don't think that Arsenal were mega counting on Rosa in the first half of this season. I think they see it a bit more long term than that, but clearly the player will want more minutes, more involvement, and to really kind of establish herself at Arsenal. I'd be very worried if she wasn't targeting that, quite frankly. But yeah, so not a big long term concern, but obviously a player for whom I think if you asked her privately would say, things haven't gone how she wanted so far. Let's kind of switch focus to the team then, and away from individuals a little bit. What has been your favourite? It doesn't have to be the best, but maybe your favourite team performance, favourite game so far this season.
Okay. Well, I think the best and the favorite, there's definitely a difference there. I think our best performance probably came Juventus away. That was when I really noticed a shift where I was like, okay, hang on a second, it might not just be this so-called post-manager bounce. I think the players have really got their rhythm. We saw like some really good football being played, and I think that was the most exciting part, where it was like, okay, we're managing this shift here. There's a bit of a transition, but now it's not only just, okay, they're putting away chances, they're actually playing better football. I think Juventus away was really the first chance we saw that for 90 minutes. But for me, the favourite was definitely the North London derby. I think there was so much about that game, I think, shaking off the cobwebs of what happened last Christmas at the Lane and coming in with such dominance. Spurs look absolutely toothless. I think Robert Villahan looked shocked, and look, I think Arsenal just looked like a team that really, really cared about the derby, which is something we've been looking for that for seasons now. And I think we've got Leah Williamson always saying like the North London derby is, a really important game. But when you've got someone like Alessia Russo scoring in 1 minute and then badge tapping, that was when I felt like, okay, the players have their groove back. They really care about this club. And obviously as fans, we want to see that against any team, but we want to see that against Tottenham. So beating Tottenham at the Lane, Tim, it was definitely the one for me.
Yeah, I share Juventus away. Definitely, I think Arsenal were really, and really, I say a bit of a coming of age performance in Europe, because those games are different, and you can see in the second game how much Juventus changed, how much they respected what Arsenal did in that first game, because they completely changed their tactics. But I think the best performance, probably Brighton at home. I think that was really, really strong against a Brighton team who've given other teams problems, and didn't give Arsenal any problems. I mean, it's tempting to say, and they were, like, Brighton were quite accommodating on the day, but like I said, like, not many teams have beaten Brighton 5-0 this season. They've taken a draw against United. Like, they gave City some problems, they gave Chelsea some problems, but they didn't give Arsenal any problems. But I think my favourite game, at the risk of recency bias, is probably Bayern at home. Not the best performance by any means, in fact. But I think, first of all, it was just a great game. But I think, and actually, it was so similar to the first Bayern game, which was really back and forth for 60, 70 minutes. But the difference in the away game is Arsenal fall apart in the last 20 minutes. The difference with the home game is Arsenal really bring it for the last 20 minutes. And some of that's game state, some of that's because Arsenal needed the win and Bayern didn't. And statistically, extraordinarily similar to the first game, actually. And I know Max Radwan, at Max Rads on Twitter, he kind of posted the FB ref kind of landing page for Bayern home and away, and they're almost identical in terms of chance creation, data, and all of that. So it wasn't a sterling performance, but I mean, you were there on Wednesday night as well, and like the weather, I was really trying to get this across to people who might have been watching at home. Like, 4 of those goals, I think, are a direct consequence of the weather, more or less, which was absolutely howling. I think you can see when Bayern score the first corner, you can just see the corner flag is basically touching the floor, because the wind's like really forcing it. So that was a significant external factor for both teams, and it impacted both teams. But I think there's just something to be said for the difference in the final 20 minutes, and the fact that it was just a great game. It's a lovely way to end this kind of this spell. And a good like Champions League win on a Wednesday night, something a bit special about it being at Meadow Park as well, after a few months away, which I just really, really enjoyed. So how about then, and I think there's going to be a section of the season where that's going to be a bit of a theme here. Worst team performance of the season so far for you?
Yeah, look, I'm going to kind of look at this from a different way, because I think if we're looking strictly from performances, the Leicester City game, although we won, was quite poor. Everton at home was obviously probably the worst I've seen us. But I think for me, it was the Chelsea game at the Emirates. I think the reason I'm saying that is Arsenal were the better team across 90 minutes. And that was
Mm.
what was the most frustrating. It came at the end of this block where it was, oh, well, we've just drawn to Everton. Watch, we'll go beat Chelsea and Bayern. And then what happened? Like, it was just a very, very bad week. It was a very, very bad fortnight to be an Arsenal fan. But sitting and watching that game in that stadium, it just felt like the first 2 Chelsea goals were scored, and they would not be scored right now against
Yeah.
Arsenal. It was 2 goals that were scored against an Arsenal team that was just like they were kicking a dead horse. They looked mentality was just out the window, and I don't think those goals would go in. I think Myra Ramirez, like how many times is someone going to do that every game? And for me, that was the most frustrating game to watch as a fan because Chelsea, who were looked at as this kind of dominant force in the WSL, are they making it not competitive? They were actually very, very toothless. I thought they were uninspiring. And that's why I hated that game so much because Arsenal did look better, but they still looked like they were kind of waiting for the game to happen to them. They didn't look like they were actually going to score. It felt like, although Arsenal were the better team, I was sitting there for 90 minutes and I was like, this is going to end. Chelsea are going to win. Like, this is going to happen exactly the way the Everton game did, exactly the way we kind of looked at King Power Stadium. So for me, that was the worst game. And that was definitely when we kind of knew it was a nail in the coffin. Look, it's going to be a hard week for Jonas Ardeval. And then obviously we know what happened then. So yeah, I think for me, that Chelsea away, at home game, that was a really, really difficult one to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I'll say mine. I think Everton at home, just because I really just didn't see Arsenal scoring that. Like from about say, I think I said this to Renee on Wednesday night actually that like when a team's chasing a goal, you get a really good sense of whether you think they're going to get it or not. And against Bayern, what I said to Renee was I just once the equaliser went in, I knew we'd score. I knew Arsenal would score. You could see it. Whereas the Everton game, we're chasing a goal and it works the other way. You get a good sense of when a team is just not going to score. And they didn't score. But to your point, the Chelsea game, I mean, there's not much more to say about the Everton game than that, but I think there's a bit more meat on the bone of the Chelsea game because I think you're right. I think overall, Arsenal were the better team. Some of it game state because Chelsea were 2-0 up early. But, I mean, essentially, Arsenal just chucked the ball in the net for them twice. And you can't do that against Chelsea. And I think it wasn't like a bad performance other than that, which is a strange thing to say because obviously that's, basically giving a team like Chelsea a 2-goal head start. But I think I kind of knew it was cooked for Jonas when Arsenal weren't defending. To be honest, like there's been issues over the last couple of years with the attacking play, but the defending was always strong under Jonas. And we're seeing that again now that the kind of Ida ball, as it were, is strong behind the ball, strong off the ball, structurally solid. And I think the Bayern game and the Chelsea game, Arsenal actually play well for large periods of both those games. I think that Bayern away game's forgotten a bit. Like the first half, Arsenal are really good away at Bayern, but I think they lost it mentally, which is a sign that it's time for a manager to go. But defensively, having conceded a few set pieces at Bayern, then to concede on 2 set pieces against Chelsea, that's when the red flag really started waving for me. And it's like, when a Jonas team isn't defending properly, it's probably done. And I think it will stay with me for a long time, Jamie, how he left the pitch after that game, because it's the only time he ever didn't join the players on the kind of lap of appreciation for the fans afterwards, straight down the tunnel. And I suspect, very strongly suspect that at that moment he knew he was going to offer his resignation. So, a real kind of watermark of the season. What about then your goal of the season so far?
I'm bringing it back to White Hart Lane. I'm bringing it back to White Hart Lane. I can't help it. I think there's so many like better goals that have been scored, but for me, Alessia Russo scoring in the opening minute against Tottenham, that was my favourite moment of the season so far. I think, albeit we've had better goals, Freedom Arnhem has scored bangers, like we've had more technically proficient goals, but Alessia Russo taking that strike first time, putting that into the bottom corner at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, that is a player that would not have done that 3 weeks earlier. Like that is a player that wouldn't have even taken that strike. Even just like a fortnight before that, she wasn't doing that. She would have taken a touch, or she would have played it backward to a midfield, kind of shifted the responsibility onto someone else. She turns, she buries that bottom corner, she grabs the Arsenal badge. I think fans have been waiting for that since she put pen to paper in North London. So for me, that was the moment where I said, hey, this striker, like if she gets some confidence, this is what we're going to see. Like you said, Tim, I think we know we have it in her, but for me, it was the goal. It was being at Spurs, yes, it was the badge tap, it was everything. Like being a fan, that was exciting. But I think the best part was, hey, like Russo's not taking that shot 2 weeks ago. She's taken it, she's buried it, and for me, that was very indicative of the form we've seen. And long may it continues because I'm so glad it has. But yeah, I'm going to say Russo.
Yeah, that was instinct finish, and
Yeah.
that's what you want to see from your striker. I mean, I was gonna pick Frida Mornham against Brighton. Your typical Frida banger, as it were. But actually, I'm gonna pick Russo again. Ole ole, um, and that's her goal against Villa, her second goal against Villa on the left foot. When she just takes the ball off Paula Thomas on the touchline and absolutely bangs it top bins on the left foot. And that is the culmination of the confidence you're talking about right there, because that's not as instinctive, but that's just a player playing with confidence, but also really assertive. It's the last minute when it's 3-0. Nobody would have batted an eyelid if she'd just let Paula Thomas run off with that ball. But it was, no, I'm taking that off you, and that's going in the net. And obviously just a lovely goal as well. One of those goals that when you're in a stadium, you kind of, that takes you aback a bit. You're like, oh, wow. Like, and where you have to watch the replay to figure out really what happened. And I just love that goal. And I think it also illustrates the variety that Russo has found when you look at the clips of all her goals this season. And clearly, the goal you point to against Spurs, that's off the left foot as well. That's clearly something she's worked on. Getting shots off on the left foot. And it actually really reminds me of something Ian Wright said years ago. Arsenal released a DVD with all Ian Wright's goals, and he talks through some of them. And he talked about how he used to work on his left foot a lot. And the way he phrased it was, because when my instinct takes over, I want my technique to be there. And like, obviously very instinctive player, Ian Wright, very instinctive finisher. And he scored a lot of left-footed goals because the ball breaks to him in the box. And he was like, if it falls on my left has to be able to do the business. And I think Russo's clearly worked on that as well. So Alessia Russo against Aston Villa is my goal of the season so far. But Frida Mornham, very honourable mention for that goal against Brighton. How about the January transfer window then? If you could sign, I'm not going to ask for like an actual individual player, but if you could sign a player in one position this January, where would it be?
I'm going to say someone in the wide area, particularly higher up the pitch, but of a lower age profile. Tim, we've spoken about it a lot. Obviously, like if you take Emily Fox out of the equation, you look at Arsenal's age profile in the width, and it's, on average, I think it's like around 30 probably. So look, I think if we could get a younger winger, a younger attacker, that would be very exciting for Arsenal. I think they need that. They need a more dynamic player. I also really, really prefer Mariona Caldente in the midfield. I think she does her best work centrally. Although when you've got a superstar like her, you can put her on the width and she'll make an impact. But I'd be really, really happy with some more depth in the wide areas. Obviously, losing Chloe Lacasse. We've got Lena Hurtig back now, but I think just a younger winger, someone that's really going to take the ball to their feet and just kind of charge the box, just someone exciting with some flair like that. That's definitely on my priority list, I'd say. Tim, yourself.
Yeah, definitely. It's weird actually, because there's a few positions where Arsenal need to future-proof a bit. Spoke on the last pod about at some point, I think in the next couple of windows, we'll see like a big defensive signing. But that's probably not an immediate priority. I think that could be more of a summer thing. Ditto, if Steph Catley is going to be a centre-back, do we need a left-back? Again, I think that can wait till the summer. Absolutely, we're going to need another wide player, 100%, and one or two, the wide players we've got might leave in the summer, for example. So, but again, we do actually have numbers there. We do need to get younger and I think faster as well. I don't think it's just an age thing. I do think we need a bit more speed on the outside. Again, I could see that waiting to the summer, whereas I look at where Arsenal are actually short right now, and it's probably central midfield.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a weird one because like Victoria Palova's there. And so, but at the same time, how much longer is Kim going to be playing? We don't know. Like her role is beginning to just come down a little notch. I don't think Leah Volt is going anywhere anytime soon in terms of her place in the team or anything like that. But I kind of, maybe I'm just convincing myself, just because, again, I still don't know with the Kira Walsh situation. I believe Arsenal will go back for that. I just don't know whether it be January or the summer. But that particularly if Catherine Cole goes, and I don't want to go into a Champions League quarter final with Mariona playing in the double pivot, because I think that'll cost us. Just because like that's not her position. Like, so I do have a little feeling for central midfield, just because I think we've got a numbers issue there now, whereas the other kind of positions we're talking about, we will have a numbers situation shortly. We probably have an age profile situation, but arguably it wouldn't be the end of the world if that didn't happen in January. So I think I'm trending towards another central midfielder, but we'll see what happens anyway. So what about, as we bring part one to an end and we'll go to people's questions in the second half, very simple question, Jamie. Do you think Renee Slegers should get the job permanently now?
How simple is that question? Well, never asked me anything easier than that, Tim. Yeah, I do think that, Tim. I think I sat in this very spot like a couple of weeks ago and I said, I'm still unconvinced. Maybe that Bayern game will be the tell-all. And I think, look, although, like you said, the game against Bayern, it wasn't the best performance, but I do think people are maybe overanalyzing it a little bit. Like you said, Tim, the only real difference between the Bayern away game and the Bayern home game was the mentality of the players. Their heads dropped in Munich. They really, really dropped, and then the floodgates open. I think you've got to take into consideration, like you said, the weather. Also, Arsenal didn't create a lot of goals from open play, but that, we can talk about the fact that it's played at Meadow Park instead of Emirates Stadium, and the players have to adjust to, the size of the pitch. There is a difference there. That maybe plays a factor. So I think for me, Renee's obviously got the dressing room ticking right now, and I think we really need to strip it back. We need to get rid of the stats and kind of look at the football and just say, hey, these players are ticking. And if someone can give me a manager right now, Tim, that is one, available, two, a proven winner, and three, just some unicorn manager that's sitting at home without a job, I am so welcome to any suggestions. But I think right now, like, you're just overanalyzing it and you're getting a little bit too stressed if you don't think, hey, Renee Slegers is the person for the job right now, because she's transformed this Arsenal team. She may have not transformed the performances. Maybe it's not completely different to the tactics that we've seen under Jonas Eidevall. But Tim, that comes down to what we've said for a while. It's his tactics were never really the issue. And I think Renee's doing not only, executing that kind of football philosophy, but she's doing that macro stuff. She's bringing in the dressing room. She's making the players confident. So I think for me right now, Arsenal should, and like you said last week, Tim, if they don't, other clubs are going to be knocking. There's a lot of clubs and national teams without managers, and she's proven herself. You're beating the German giants in a great turnaround. So I think for me, I'm very, 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 I'd be very happy to see Renee Slegers be the permanent manager. I can't lie, Tim.
Yeah, definitely. And, with the talking about the Bayern game, it is, by the way, very significant to say that Arsenal fell apart in the final 20 minutes away, and in the home game, they took it to Bayern. That's a very significant thing,
Yes.
Whether it shows up in the data or not. And that shows you the change in this team. I think as well, one of the things that's probably happened as well, and I wouldn't entirely separate myself from this, I think under Jonas, I just don't think it was a disaster. It didn't work in the end. And yeah, that final week before he went, things had gone to pot. Clearly the message had stopped getting through and all of that. But I don't view Jonas's reign as any kind of disaster. I think it just didn't quite work. I think there were signs where it nearly worked sometimes, or like we'd pick up a Conti Cup and you'd be like, okay, this is it. Or we'd get to the semi-final of the Champions League and you think, okay, this is it. And it just never quite happened. It was no kind of disaster, Jonas Eidevall's reign. And I think I probably fell into this trap as well when he resigned, as like, oh God, we've got to rip everything up. We need a completely different style of play. And actually it's like, do we? Or do we just need to do that style a little bit better? Maybe like I'm just high on the hopium and all of that at the moment because we're playing well, and that's like affected my analysis. And maybe in a year's time I'll be saying, oh God, like I wasn't objective enough in this period and I ignored the signs and all of that. But Yeah, I mean, I wrote the newsletter on this week on why I think she should get the job. But one thing, so for those of you who are patrons of the Arsenal Vision podcast, which is the other podcast I do, which I accept is probably not many of the people listening to this, myself and Clive talked about this, and I want to get your view on this, Jamie. But I think also, like, it is significant that Renee is a female coach. And I think that for the fans in particular, if we have a female coach that performs this well, and then, for example, she doesn't get the job, and we do hire like a male coach, for example, like, I don't think that's a good look if Arsenal do that. I'm interested to get your view on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a really, really interesting thought, Tim. I hadn't really thought about that. I really do think that, look, if Arsenal kind of overlook Renee right now, they're almost looking at her as, oh, you'll fill the gaps until we get the next manager in. And without saying, okay, like they're falling into a trap of looking for a male coach because they think he's going to automatically be better. And I'm not saying Arsenal will do that. And I'm not saying Arsenal have done that in the past. But it will look exactly like that, Tim.
It's
That's a very
optics.
good point. It's optics because you're looking at a manager right now. It's kind of like, what more do you want her to do? Since she's taken charge of the interim role, what box has she not like ticked that you want her to tick right now? And if Arsenal were to go and get out a male manager, whether they've won trophies, whether they haven't won trophies, proven winner, don't care, whatever style of football, and they come in and they don't succeed, regardless of whether, there's always going to be a transitional period with a new manager. Regardless of that, Tim, you're right, it's optics because it doesn't look good. Because right now it's kind of like, okay, what more do you want Renee to do? What more is in that kind of job description that she hasn't ticked off right now? Because she's gone unbeaten. She's only gotten one draw out of how many wins? Like, she's beaten Bayern Munich. She's topped the Champions League group. You can't really look at someone like her and say, don't give her the job. So I guess, Tim, yeah, you're right. Like, well, whether you agree or not, but like, yeah, you bring a male manager in and it looks bad, especially if he doesn't perform, because it's like, okay, what more do you really want her to do?
Yeah, and that is like a tricky one for the club, because if for example they do have like a male manager in mind, and it should be done on merit, and if they think that that's the best thing, then maybe they do have to be strong and just do that. But at the same time, I really think, I might be wrong about this, but I really perceive a lot of fans would view it that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
do think it would puncture the balloon a little bit in terms of the mood. And obviously, again, the club has to balance, like, well, okay, the vibes are good at the moment, but we're thinking about the next 2, 3, 5 years with this appointment. And we can't entirely anchor ourselves to this, but I'd be more convinced by that if I thought there was an outstanding
Yeah.
candidate out there. And I kind of just don't really think that there is.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I kind of do think they have to go with this. And, I think, again, I said this in the newsletter, a lot of managerial appointments, we don't like to admit it in football. We like to think that everything's like strategized to an absolute point, and a lot of football is. I think managerial hires are almost random sometimes. I really think there is a high element of randomness when it comes to selecting a manager, and I think maybe Arsenal have stumbled onto something here, which is, I'm not saying that critically of Arsenal, because I think any team with a good manager, they usually stumble into it. Like when Chelsea appointed Emma Hayes like 12, 13 years ago, I guarantee you they didn't think this would happen, that
Mm-hmm.
they didn't think she'd become this coach. They might have thought she'd be good, but like no one strategized this. It just turned out that way. So I think sometimes if something falls into your lap, let it fall into your lap.
Yeah.
And that's, and I hope that doesn't sound like not being effusive enough about Renee and what she's done. And I think also, if there are any doubts, or if, for example, you're thinking about recruitment, team building, and you don't know what her strengths are there, then there's a position to backfill on the coaching staff, because if Renee steps up, we're one coach down. And you look at that hire and you look at what do we want there? Do we want someone Renee knows and trusts? Do we want someone senior? Do we want someone who perhaps has that real strategic kind of side? Like, it's a coaching staff at the end of the day. And so Arsenal will have to make like another coaching appointment one way or another. So you can think about who you surround her with if that's what you think you need. But anyway, that was a pretty good kind of look back for part one, and we will be back with your questions right after this. Okay, we're back with part two with myself, Tim Stillman, and Jamie Spanger with the kind of Arsenal Women half season review. And now we're going to answer some of your questions submitted to us on Blue Sky. And thanks everyone for your questions. Again, a lot of meat on the bone here. Jamie, I talked a lot at the end of the first part, so I'm going to have the first question for you, and it's from at Ariella W. Do you think there's anything Lotta can do to regain her place in the side in the second half of the season?
Wow, that's a loaded one, isn't it? Yeah, look, it's hard. I think especially in defense, it's where you see the least rotation. You don't really see managers make big changes. You don't really have like, oh, let's bring on a centre back in the 70th minute and see if they can change the game. It's not really, unless you've got Jem Beattie coming up against Wolfsburg to score an equaliser. Like, you don't really have that happen. So I think it's hard for her right now because if you can't move Leah Williamson and Steph Catley out of the center of defense right now. You just can't do it. Like, they're playing too well together. I think they really suit each other's game states as well. I think for Lotta, she's just got to bide her time. It's hard. Like, we obviously don't know what happens in the back room and at training, whether she's like kind of proving herself at training, but she's just got to rely on opportunities. Also, the Conti Cup's coming. Sorry, the Subway WSL League Cup is coming up. We've also got, the FA Cup game against Bristol City. So the calendar becomes very, very condensed now. So I think, Lotta's going to have her opportunities, and it's just about seizing them, because right now she really has to prove herself to be better than Catley and Williamson, because I don't know why you'd move that centre-back pairing right now, but she is going to be faced with the opportunities to do so. It's whether she kind of takes the bull by the horns, I think, and it's a hard situation for her to be in because those two are performing so well. But yeah, it's just about biding her time, I reckon.
Yeah, I think there needs to be an injury there for her to get back in, and that's what happened with Lotta herself last season, right? Like, there were some injuries, she got in and then no one could move her. I do wonder if she would just think, I've done this a lot during my time at Arsenal, like I've never been that firm first choice. I've always been relying on injuries elsewhere. Maybe that will be in her mind because her contract is up. The end of the season, she can start talking to clubs abroad from 10 days' time, from January the 1st. So we'll see what happens there. Have you got a question for me then?
I do. This one's from NDMW at Blue Sky. Also, in case you don't cover this in the first part, we kind of did, but how do you evaluate our summer signings after half a season? So you spoke a little bit about Rose Kafaji, but Mariona Caldente and Daphne Van Domselaar, how have you seen their transition, Tim?
Yeah, sure. So with Mariona, I think it took a little while to find her, actually, and I don't think Jonas ever quite cracked that because she was moving around quite a bit. But I think since Renee came in, clarified the structure a bit, pushed Katie McCabe up, allow Mariona to be a bit more of a 10, I think she's been superb. Like I say, I don't love her in the deeper position, but it's not really a criticism. She's literally never played there before. She played pretty much everywhere else, but yeah, just one of those players you can just see she's a superb footballer. And I think she's another one who manages stress so well as well. The way she sticks that penalty away, notwithstanding, but the way she handles the ball. And yeah, I think she's just given Arsenal a little bit of creative. Like, if you looked at the Arsenal squad last season, it was missing a creative player, I think. And she's really brought that in. But I guess probably more me, and we all knew we were signing a 28-year-old from Barcelona. Like, I think we knew she was going to be good, but I'll perhaps back this onto a question from Brock Strongo. Love that name. Is the shift from Zinsberger to DBD now more or less permanent, and how do you think it's gone so far? I mean, Van Domselaar, for me, I was going to say in the first half, is probably my kind of surprise. Only a little bit, because my assessment of Van Domselaar was, when we signed her, she has all the materials to be the best goalkeeper in the world, but she's not there yet, and that she has some development to do. which, I mean, she's about to turn 25, which for a goalkeeper is very young. And I always felt that it might take her a year to shift Manu permanently, that she'd get plenty of game time, maybe in the cups, a game here and there, but it might take a season before shifting Manu, who I think has really, really improved. Right now, I don't even think it's a thought about who you put in goal. It's
Yeah.
Daphne at the moment, and she's still got a little bit of development with her short passing, maybe. And Zinsberger is someone very good to learn from in that respect. But I've been surprised at how good she's looked so early on. And I really think she is the undisputed number one. And I was delighted we signed her. That was exactly the profile I wanted. Like, good young up and coming goalkeeper to really push Manu. But I didn't expect it to happen this quickly. And it's absolutely correct that it's happened. As much as I like Manu, sorry, I just think Daphne looks better. And she's come up with some really key saves as well. And that's so one of the things about being goalkeeper for a team like Arsenal. You might get called on once in a game, but it's probably going to be a big moment, and she's just managed those big moments. A couple of really good saves against Bayern as well on Wednesday. So, yeah, Mariona has been really good. I suspected she'd be really good. Daphne's been a really pleasant surprise with how quickly she just looks like a world-class goalkeeper. And yeah, I think she is the number one, and she should be until something happens that means she isn't. So, yeah, I think Daphne's been great. Been really delighted with how it's gone for her. Why don't I'm going to go to this one from at LJNE on Blue Sky. What's been your favourite tactical tweak by Renee?
Tim, what do you think I'm going to say?
I think I know what you're going to say.
Tim, I want you to guess. Guess.
I think you're going to say playing Steph Catley at centre
Yeah.
half, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, look, I'll say that that's obvious, but I'll that was definitely my favorite, I think, kind of lineup tweak. I think the biggest thing we've seen with Renee, though, is she's kind of just simplified it. We've spoken about, Jonas Eidevall's tactics and how that was never the issue for him. And he really turned up in big games because he was quite a strong tactician. I think for Renee, she's gotten that tactics and she stripped them down a little bit because Jonas maybe tried to do a bit too much, maybe tried to feed the players with too much information. And I think the Aston Villa game was the biggest indicator for me for this because like the players were getting the ball in the wide areas and rather than play it into a midfielder and just do doggies across the 18-yard box, they just dinked it in. And we saw that really, really affect Villa because they were ready and they were prepared for Arsenal to kind of sit back and hold possession. And the biggest thing I've seen with Renee, she's just made it simple for the players. She's given them simple instructions. They're playing quicker football because they're thinking less. And whether that's a tactical thing, and I do believe it is, because I do think stuff like, first ball in, coming quicker and not holding on to possession, that is tactics. But it's also opened up the players to be able to, think less. And they're playing much more instinctive football. They're playing one-touch football. And look, I think that is, other than Steph Catley being the best centre-back in the world right now, I'm going to say Renee's stripping it down and she's making it simple. And the players are really flourishing off that, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to say the way she's used Katie McCabe, and this is another device for me to say what a great footballer Katie McCabe is and how lucky we are to have her. And I just think some of the, and don't get me wrong, like we've talked about like the discipline side and there are justifiable criticisms and there are justifiable concerns about that. I just hate the way it absolutely overtakes everything and no one ever talks about like her football, and she plays every minute of every game. There is a strong data set there about what she does as a footballer. And the way Renee's used her, at first when we had Kim and Molly there, Katie's the fifth attacker. She's basically playing as a left winger and really opening up the attack. Kim and Molly come out. Katie's inverting into midfield and being a third midfielder. And that's what I really like about this player, and I like about the way Renee's used her. She's used her as a kind of, where the team needs support the most, that's where Katie goes. And Katie's a good enough footballer to be able to do that. So I think that's been my favourite. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit when we're talking about a player that needs to pick up, and we've had a lot of questions about Beth Mead. One's from Queen Guna, there's another one from Aiden. So Queen Guna said, just as Russo has hit her stride, Mead seems to be out of sorts. Do you think it's a temporary thing with Beth, or is there more to it, and is it something we should be worried about? And Aiden says, she seemed to come back so well from the injury, but this season she just doesn't seem the same and is now struggling to get picked for the starting 11. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I had these questions as well, and that's kind of why I held back on it in the first part. I think there is a strong element to which the introduction rather of Mariona hasn't suited Beth, because we've got that more wandering winger on one side. It's benefited Caitlin, because that means you need balance, and Caitlin's your balancing player because she stays wide and holds the width and everything like that, and that's not necessarily what Beth does. Um, and so I do think that's the biggest part of it. I do, and there's stuff we can speculate on as well. Like, is her future up in the air? I don't know, because I believe her contract might be up at the end of the season, and Viv going in the summer. Again, I'm speculating, really, and I try to stay away from that kind of speculation usually. But I think it's fair to throw in, like, I don't know if like there's a potential symptom there, but we haven't quite seen the same player. Definitely not. I think it would be disrespectful of her talent to say that we have, because Beth Mead before this season was, we're talking about Katie there playing every minute of every game. That was Beth. Never on the bench, never substituted, because her output has been so strong for such a long time. Goals and assists machine, and it has dried up a bit. I do think it is largely tactical. I do think working out how you get Beth and Mariona in the same team is potentially a bit of a question. At the same time, because Caitlin's been playing really well as well, she hasn't been able to really build up a head of steam and get some games together. So I don't know, maybe in the new year or something, maybe like Caitlin misses a couple of games, Beth gets 3-4 games back to back, because that's what we saw with Frida last season as well, right? Like, when you're in and out, you can't show your best form, basically. And same with Lotta, same discussion we're having there. Like, look at her last season when she was playing every minute of every game. Like, it's that real paradox where you need that, but you can't get it because you're not playing well enough, and you usually you need a bit of an injury or something to clear the way for you. So I do think there's a longer term question about Beth and Mariona. I don't necessarily think they definitely can't play together. I do think you could sort it out. Like, they're both, 28, 29 years old. Like, I don't see it as terminal, but it's the first half of this season hasn't really gone. We haven't seen the real Beth Mead. I don't think, and because we all know what the real Beth Mead looks like, and the real Beth Mead gets on the Ballon d'Or podium, that doesn't happen by accident. So to say we've seen that version of Beth this season would just be a lie, frankly. So maybe there's a long-term concern there, but yeah, we'll see in the second half of the season. I think she'll be motivated for a big second half of the season. How about this one then? I think we should, relitigate the end of the Jonas era a little bit. So I'm interested on your answer to this from Tally Learner at Talil. Now that we have a different person leading the same squad, what do you think led to the breakdown in Jonas's final months? And a second part to that, do you think coaches ever come back from a loss of momentum and faith, or is that always a one-way road? So, yeah, I guess, like, in the interest of a season review, what do you think was really the issue that led to Jonas having to resign?
Yeah, I had this question too. It's a good one. I think, look, like we've said, Jonas had his moments where he looked like a stronger manager than some other moments. And I think the biggest thing is someone Adam Salter said this, who's an Arsenal fan, made a really good point that Jonas always kind of seemed like he needed some big event or motivation to get the players going, and we saw that in the League Cup final when Frida Monum obviously passed out, and when that happened, the players kind of, that motivated them to really play for her, and that was a nice moment. And then you obviously see the injury crisis, and it always felt like Jonas needed these kind of big events to motivate the dressing room. And that's a really good point, I think, because we're not seeing that with Renee. I think Renee's obviously just getting the players motivated by being a good, people person and being a good macro manager. And I think for Jonas, the biggest thing was he really struggled to get the team out of tight spaces when they were feeling pressure, because he wasn't really good at that, person to person interaction, as opposed to, he was a very good tactician. He was good at, managing the squad in big matches. But I think he really, really struggled when it came down to the human aspect of it. And we saw that transpire on the field, because when the players felt the pressure and when he felt the pressure, he needed something drastic to happen in order to motivate the players. And I think that came from the players themselves. I don't know if that came from the manager, and I don't know if that ever did come from the manager. I think in the 2022 season, the players got us to third. The players got us to that Champions League semi-final. It was kind of like an all-round effort where Katie McCabe and, our academy kids and Jodie Taylor, it was all we kind of had at some
Jodie Taylor and a dream.
like Jodie Taylor in a dream. And it was the players doing that. And I think Jonas's downfall arose from the way that he wasn't able to get players out of human situations when they were feeling that pressure. He really struggled with, maybe having a conversation with Alessia Russo and saying, hey, you're struggling. Let's break that down, because we know you're technically a good footballer. So what else is going on? And I think that's where that breakdown came from. I think someone else made a good point. His name's Tom. He's another Arsenal fan, Tom Marr, a great journalist. He made a great point that if Jonas is to end up in the NWSL, he thinks he'll excel there, because obviously they've got the playoff system, right? He just needs to make the playoffs. And we've seen Jonas is very good in cup competitions, because every game is high stakes, high pressure. And when he doesn't have to top the league and win the NWSL that way, he might actually be a very, very important manager for San Diego if he does end up there, albeit I'm not sure. So yeah, I think for Jonas, he relies on external and environmental factors to kind of get the dressing room going. He can't do that himself. And that's where his downfall came from, so to speak, downfall.
Yeah, I think those are really good observations. Like, there are a couple of quotes that stick out. I remember him saying to me once, "We're better when there's energy in the game." Was one, and there was one at the end of that 22-23 season. You're talking about an event, like those injuries, they were events, and he was really good at using that as an energy and as a motivation. Definitely. And he said at the end of that season, I have strengths and weaknesses like everyone else, but he said he felt crisis management was one of his biggest strengths. And I agree with that. But the thing is, if you want to win the league, winning the league is humdrum. It's, can you just go out and win 1-0 away at Liverpool 3 days after you've beaten, you've been in Oslo? Can you just win that game 1-0 and forget about it? Can you just have like a 4-0 home win against Aston Villa where, everyone's looking at their phones with 20 minutes to go because the game's over? Like, that's what winning the league relies on, that humdrum. And I think you're right. I think that kind of, that need for lightning, that need like for thunder and lightning all the time, that just doesn't happen across 22 league games. It might happen in 5 or 6, but yeah, I think you're right. I think just getting that consistent, almost boring style of management is a very, very different skill. And yeah, I think at the end, clearly the message wasn't quite there. I think I really started to worry in the second half of last season when there were those issues against deep blocks, and he was talking about steps forward against them. I think we beat Tottenham 1-0 at home in March, and it was quite uninspiring. We won 1-0, and he was kind of talking about improvements against deep blocks, and I was a bit like, I'm not sure I see it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I see this big improvement. And yeah, and I think there were, once you got Emily Fox into the team, there was a bit more rotation of positions in attack. But to me, it still looked quite stiff and unnatural, as if that jarred against his actual brand of football, which is to be structurally really sound, really solid behind the ball and push teams back. But I don't think the kind of the fluidity side came to him naturally. And I think he tried, but I also think when a manager starts to try to do things that they're maybe not comfortable with, it's a bit of a sign. But yeah, I think there's kind of plenty there. because I had a nibble on that question as well, I'm going to ask you another one.
Go.
And given that we're off the back of the Bayern game, Arsenal are going to be in the quarterfinals of the Champions League against Wolfsburg, Real Madrid, or Man City. Absurdly, the draw is not happening until February the 7th. Nobody seems to be able to explain why that is, apart from the fact that UEFA are stupid. But this is from Clive at Clive-B. How far do you think we can get in the UWCL now? Any teams you specifically want or want to avoid in the next round? So Wolfsburg, Real Madrid, Man City, who's your preference out of those, and how far do you think Arsenal can go?
Tim, every time you say I'm going to ask two questions in a row, you steal my question. Every time. This is a good one. I think, to be fair, like topping the group it was more than just topping the group, because it was giving the players confidence and giving the manager confidence that they can like be, yeah, for lack of a better word, like clutch in those situations. But it also means you avoid Chelsea, Lyon, and Barcelona, which is ideal because that's awful. For me, I think that Arsenal can make the semis. I think that the pool of opponents, although very quality, I think they're beatable. And Arsenal, if they continue on this momentum, when they have a bit of a break, they can beat any of these teams. I don't want Man City purely from a fan point of view. I think that's boring. We play them too often, and I don't really want to like have a European away day to Manchester. So I'm gonna say I think Real Madrid is a good one for Arsenal to have a bite at. I really do think Real Madrid are quite a vulnerable team. They got lucky in their group. They did have Chelsea, but they got lucky having Celtic and FC Twente. I think that they do look vulnerable, and Arsenal will be able to kind of capitalize on that, especially with the form that Alessia Russo is in right now, because Real Madrid's defense is not special. I wouldn't mind Wolfsburg either, but it does give me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies. I can't lie. Like, that's not me being
There's some
analytical.
scars
Yeah,
there.
there's open wounds there, Tim, that haven't healed yet. But no, tell me yours before I ask a question.
I want Real Madrid just
Yeah.
because, like you say, we play City all the time. We'll likely play them in one of the cups at least, maybe even both. And yeah, I think it's a bit much. Wolfsburg, yeah, we've had them twice in recent seasons. I think we could beat them. It'd be close. I'm not saying we definitely would, but yeah, I think Real Madrid first. I think they're the weakest team of the three, and secondly, we've just not played them before ever, actually. And Arsenal, Real Madrid, you put that at the Emirates. I think you sell some tickets as well off the back of Real Madrid's name, if not their actual women's team. But yeah, I want Madrid all day. What's your next question for me?
Yes, this one's from Dan Merker. I feel like this is a good kind of summary question, Tim. It says, given where they are now, what are your criteria for a successful season?
I think definitely have to finish at least second. I think City are totally gettable. I've always felt that. I've maybe got an inkling that Chelsea are gettable as well. Again, maybe I'm high on all the hopium here, but I just think Chelsea have got a few more points than they deserve, and that maybe we could reel them in a little bit. So those games against Chelsea and City in January and February, like Arsenal win those, they're bang in the title race. And I know that's a big ask. That's a very, very big ask, but win those and Arsenal are bang back in the title race. But I think definitely finishing second, at least. I really think we should be finishing above City. I think we're better than them anyway, but with their injuries, like I really, really think we should. And yeah, let's win a cup. FA Cup, Conti Cup, Champions League, they're all there. They're all there for the taking. And our bad start to the season has done nothing to alter that whatsoever. The bad start to the season affected the league and the league only. So all of the cups are on the table and Arsenal should win one of them. And again, like I accept there are some really, really big teams in there, but given the fact that Arsenal might have cost themselves a title challenge, to kind of really salvage the season, I think they need to win something again. And they have the last two seasons. They've won the Conti Cup. So, FA Cup as well. Arsenal are going to be 9 years without winning that, which is unthinkable. The amount of times I've seen Arsenal win that trophy, and it's not happened since 2016. So I'd love to win the FA Cup as well. Arsenal have a special history with that. Day out at Wembley as well. I imagine how many tickets Arsenal would sell for that. Like Wembley being red and white in May would just look fantastic. So, yeah, I think minimum second place. Let's see if we can drag ourselves back into a title race, but a cup at least is kind of minimum we should be aiming for. What about I've spoken a bit about her in the second half anyway, so maybe I'll make this my last question to you, but it's from Laura Brady at Braids13. Are you at all worried about the constant shifting of Mariona to whatever hole we need to fill could be detrimental to her becoming a real superstar for us?
Yeah, I had this question too. I think it's a good question, and it's interesting because if you were to look at this for any other player on the field, I think that has total detrimental effects. But at the end of the day, I do think Mariona is a superstar. I think she's a cut above a lot of players in the WSL, and we saw that in the Aston Villa game. You put her in the 8. She only found out that morning or the day before even, and she was phenomenal. And I think that it's just kind of what you get when you have a player of her caliber. She's able to be thrown in the deep end anywhere, and she performs so well because she is such an exceptional footballer. And sometimes I forget how good she is when I'm like, okay, she's playing for Arsenal. That is insane. Like I had a moment at Meadow Park where I was like, what is she doing at Meadow Park? What is she doing here? But no, I think like if we're to say you can put her anywhere, that's great. But again, no, I do think she needs consistency. I think moving her around is going to affect her, but it's also going to affect the players around her because they don't think Arsenal really, really rely on that connection right now, and that's what's getting them through games. So look, I think it would be nicer if we could see her more consistently played in a position, and that would be my preference. But I'm not like worried, and I'm not going to be waving like the white flag if she is to be moved around to the width to central midfield. I agree with you, Tim. I don't really want to see her too deep, but I think there's so much positivity and versatility as well. And that's what we've got with a player like Mariona. You can put her both ways and she doesn't get rattled. I'm more just concerned about how the whole starting 11 kind of adapt to that. But yeah, so I guess yes, but I do think sometimes it's okay to have a player that's just simply versatile. Hey.
Yeah, that's what she's done her whole career. Like for Barcelona, she's played where Barcelona needed her. Played as a false 9, played as a left winger, played as a 10. And look, maybe she doesn't want that anymore. Maybe part of the reason she comes to Arsenal is, no, I want to be, I don't want to be that player. But I kind of think that wherever you play Mariona, she does Mariona things, and you just let her do Mariona things wherever she is. Do you have a final question for me?
I'm run dry.
Okay, all right.
Do you have anything else?
No. I think that's fine. I think that was a good conversation to end on. Actually, I think Mariona's a fascinating player and been a really good signing. So, so that's our half season review right there. It's flown by, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely gone. But I feel like it's just been an absolute roller coaster. I need a couple of weeks to just not think about Arsenal women and being too emotionally draining. But no, I'm excited for 2025, Tim. I have a good feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Whereas I think this time last year, going into the break off the back of losing a North London derby and thinking, oh my God, like what is this season and what's it going to bring us and all of that. And there are a lot of question marks there, I think, at that point. So I think we're in a happier space. And, I think we're going to get a permanent managerial appointment pretty soon. I know the club want to do that. They want to take care of that over the break. So, and we'll see if anything happens in the January transfer window. We'll try to be across that for you. We will have another episode for you kind of between Christmas and New Year. I'm going to do a bit of a meta episode on WOSO content, as it were. Got a good guest lined up for that. So we will have at least one podcast for you in the break. For example, if and when the managerial appointment is made, we'll probably do something around that as well. And if Arsenal sign anyone in the January transfer window, we will do a podcast on whoever that player might be, as we usually do. So there will definitely be minimum one podcast before Arsenal come back on January the 12th, but I suspect there might be another need for another one in there as well. So we've got you covered one way or another. But Jamie, thanks as ever.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Merry Christmas and, safe, peaceful one if you celebrate. If not, safe and peaceful time for you and your families. And we will be back next week with another podcast. So until then, thanks so much and speak to you soon.